Ted Suss has been a very busy man for a long time. I have no clue how old he is, but I think he's
14.
done 14. Well, you're prematurely gray. He's currently serving as executive director of the Friends of the Minnesota Valley on a volunteer basis. This is a position he has held since 2014. Representing the Friends, Mr. Suss was one of the 8 persons who conceived and planned the Minnesota River Congress, which some of you maybe have not heard of. He serves on the 4-member management committee of the River Congress and has been responsible for securing McKnight Foundation funding for the Congress for the past 3 years. I have known him just for the last few years. When did this board?
3 years.
I can't remember. Is it 3? You'd remember, John. Yeah, the 3 of us are on that board, probably 8 or 10 board members. Ted served 2 terms, or 4 years, in the Minnesota legislature way back when he was probably 1 then, if you're 14. What years were those?
75 through 78.
75 through 78. He's also had a career in public education with the Edina schools, and I'm not sure where else. I don't want to take any of his time here. But since his retirement from school administration, he has devoted most of his time to public service. In addition to his volunteer work for the Friends of Minnesota Valley, Ted is president of the Minnesota Valley Chapter of the Izaak Walton League, along with others. And he's an active member of several service organizations, and he does raise pigs. Ted.
Thank you, Karen. I don't live in Bloomington, so you don't have to worry. I'm not raising pigs in Bloomington. Karen, as she said, is member of the board of the Minnesota Valley Chapter of the Izaak Walton League, as is John Crampton, who's her other guest today, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. I live down about halfway between Redwood Falls and Marshall, and I won't tell you how someone gets from living there to being the president of the Minnesota Valley Chapter, which is based in Bloomington, because it would take all of the time that Deb said I have. And I told her when I get to the end of my time, just throw her coffee cup at me, but that's full now, so I'm taking that back. I'm taking that back. And council member, I recall meeting you at the Refuge when we had a little reception to thank people who got some funding for the Minnesota Valley State Trail. The Minnesota Valley Chapter is located just west of the Country Club on the other side of Auto Club Road. We put a new sign up there last year. Our chapter house, there's a Girl Scout group that planted a pollinator garden in front of the chapter house a couple of years ago. And that picture was before it was totally bloomed. But part of our goal is to provide an opportunity for young people to engage with the outdoors. And I'll come back to that point a little bit later also. Our chapter is one of, how many chapters are there nationally, John? Do you know? I don't even know. 500. One of the 500, say that with authority, like I know that fact, chapters of the Izaak Walton League of America, an organization that's dedicated to conservation of air, water, wildlife, natural resources. There's an interesting story to the history of the Izaak Walton League. It was founded in 1922 by a gentleman, actually a group of people in Chicago, but the architect and the person who took the most credit for it was a gentleman by the name of Will Dilg. And Will Dilg was a liquor salesman, and we all know what happened in the 1920s. And he also was an avid hunter and fisherman. I think he did some fishing guiding and hunting guiding. And he used his probably enforced sabbatical from liquor sales, rather than going to work for Al Capone, to form the Izaak Walton League. His primary objective was the creation of the Upper Mississippi River National Wildlife Refuge, which was established in 1924. There were a lot of proposals to flood part of the river bottoms for hydroelectric plants and things like that. And he was concerned about preserving what he thought was the Upper Mississippi National Wildlife Refuge extends all the way from north of Wabasha, clear down practically to the Iowa-Missouri border. And he was instrumental both in forming the National Izaak Walton League and using that organization to persuade Congress to create that refuge. And that's our heritage, that's where we come from. Speaking of heritage, when I came in here today, I sort of felt like I was at home. I saw Les's name up there, Fujitaka, your superintendent. Back when I was getting my degrees in education administration at the university, he taught one of the courses that I took, one of the more interesting courses that I took. And I took classes back when I was a little boy, between when I was 14 and 60, no. At Normandale Community College, and I get to sit here at the table with the president of Normandale Community College. And John asked me, when I first got here today, if I'd ever spoken to a Rotary Club before. And I said, or if I spoke to a lot of Rotary Clubs. I said, you know, over the years, I've probably spoken to about 8 or 10 of them across the state and across my career. And I was thinking, I said, you know what? I spoke to a Rotary Club in Denmark. My son was a Rotary exchange student. And he went to Denmark, and they took a kid from a small rural Minnesota town and turned him into a world citizen who was, I'm incredibly proud of him, and most of the things that he does that makes me proud are things that came to be part of his life when he was a Rotary exchange student on the island of Bornholm in Denmark. And I went over at the end of his year and met all 4 of his host families, had a delightful party at one of the host families' homes. It started at about 5 in the evening, and we finally left about 11 because we had to get on a plane the next morning. And they were still drinking wine. If you've been to Denmark, you know that they consume a lot of beer and wine. So I've got a background with Rotary, even though I've never been a Rotarian. But back to the program. There's a lot of national programs or programs that the national organization focuses on, mostly relating to natural resources, the environment, and conservation. There's a program that's really just getting kicked off the last year or so called Save Our Streams. And our goal nationally is to have citizen water monitoring on streams to monitor water quality, turn it into their state, in our case, the Pollution Control Agency, or nationally, the EPA. They provide training, they provide equipment, they provide materials for public relations. But the Save Our Streams program is right now probably the #1 national initiative of the National Izaak Walton League. We belong to, our chapter is one of 6 chapters of the Minnesota Division. John Crampton is the immediate past president of the Minnesota Division. As I said, there's 16 chapters from Duluth to Detroit Lakes to Winona, Austin. Bloomington has the distinction, it just dawned on me today, as being the only city in the state of Minnesota that is home to 2 Izaak Walton League chapters, the Bush Lake chapter and the Minnesota Valley chapter. I think the reason there's 2 is the boards of the 2 don't get along. There's this guy, John Crampton, who's on the Bush Lake board, who just can't get along with this guy named John Crampton, who's on the Minnesota Valley board. And so that's why we have to have 2 chapters.
I'm at war with myself.
Yeah, war with himself. But our chapter started out as the Minneapolis chapter. At that time, it was primarily the big hitter downtown businessmen who were environmentalists, probably mostly hunters and fishermen and that sort of thing. And back in about 1967, as near as I've got it pinned down, the chapter bought the property on Auto Club Road and moved its headquarters down there. They just changed the name to the Minnesota Valley chapter about 4 years ago. Prior to that, it was called the Minneapolis chapter. This tells you a little bit. The organization was one of those that wasn't bringing in new members like you folks obviously are. And the membership was dwindling because of this thing called death. And they were down to just 4 or 5 people that were coming to the meetings if they really worked hard at trying to get a big turnout for a meeting. And I was recruited and other people were recruited to become members of a new board to try and reinvigorate the chapter. So at the first meeting I ever attended, I got elected president. How's that for either nobody wants the job or I don't know what the other possible things could be. The state...
Didn't have time to run a background.
Yeah, they couldn't do a background check. I was also using an assumed name. But Every year, the Minnesota Division holds at Normandale Community College. Thank you very much for allowing us to use your facility. We call it the Watershed Summit, and we invite speakers that have particular knowledge and expertise on watershed type issues, everything from agricultural drainage to municipal, what do you call them in the backyard, rain gardens. We had the 2018, this is an old slide, we had the 2018 meeting about about a month ago, I suppose, if you could. Our chapter house. The chapter house was built in the early 1900s. It's still somewhat rustic in some ways, but in the last 3 or 4 years, we've made it fully accessible. We put a nice ramp on the back. We took 2 bathrooms that were tiny little bathrooms and opened them up so they're ADA qualified. Why is that important? Well, any member of our chapter who belongs to an organization that has a mission similar to ours can use our chapter house free of charge for meetings. So maybe meetings of their board of directors, or if they want to have a book club meeting, or if they want to have a discussion group on something. Any member of our chapter can use the chapter house, and of course we want to make sure that anybody who belongs to any of those organizations, in addition to our own, can fully use it, so we invested some of our funds to make the chapter house fully accessible. You'll see on the roof, this last summer we had to put a new roof on, but we installed about 9.5 kW of solar. And so now our electric bill for February was a minus $24. And we've got one panel down here. We just installed that down low so that if people come and want to look at it and actually feel and touch and see a solar panel, they don't have to crawl up on the roof. Or they don't have to walk way down into the woods in order to see them on the roof. So we're very happy. It fits with our mission. We're very happy to be reducing our carbon footprint. We produce, when I said our bill was minus 24, that's the bill that includes our natural gas for the heat. And so we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint by overproducing electricity to offset the natural gas we use for heat. We have some volunteer events. You can switch right to the next one. Last summer, we had a big event in cooperation with a group called Great River Greening, and we had exactly, to the number, 100 people show up and volunteer, and we cleared buckthorn. If anyone wants, we have some buckthorn. You can come and transplant it to your yards, and garlic mustard. So we had those 100 people clearing the property. We've thinned out the woods a little bit to open the canopy to get a little more sun to the ground. This coming May 19th, you will all want to sign up and come out. We're having another event. We're going to plant somewhere in the neighborhood of, I guess I didn't put that slide up there, 5,000 to 7,000, they call them plugs. They're halfway between a seed and a seedling. 5,000 to 7,000 shade, hardy, flowering plants and sedges. They're all native plants. They're all native to this part of Minnesota. Our goal, obviously, is to create some pollinator habitat, but also we've got some ravines through the property. So at the top of the ravines, we're going to plant things that will seed down the ravines over the years to reduce soil erosion. This, I already mentioned the Girl Scouts put in that pollinator garden. Last summer we had 2 Eagle Scout projects completed on our property. One young man and his troop dug up a section of our lawn, about 1/3 of an acre, and planted it into a pollinator garden. And another young man and his troop created an internal, within our property, walking trail with wood chips. Somebody here said that they volunteered at one of the chapter houses and said, I've carried a lot of wheelbarrows full of wood chips. Well, that's what these young people were doing. We're hoping to find more Eagle Scout projects in the future. It's great to have the young kids out there learning about the outdoors and doing something. There's benches out there with name plaques on them, wood duck houses. Over the years, I couldn't tell you how many Eagle Scout projects have been completed on our property. We hope to have more. This is something live in Redwood County. I'm president of our county farmers union. I can't say no. Farmers Union has a series of day camps, and they have a couple of week-long camps. And I thought, why don't we have a day camp in the urban area or the suburban area and teach kids from Bloomington what it's like for a kid to grow up on a farm and a little bit about where food originates. So it doesn't come from the grocery store, it comes from a farm. So every year, this will be our third one this coming June 13th, we have a one-day day camp free of charge for elementary age students. We usually have about 15 kids show up. I'm hoping we get a little more this year. But that's just a picture of them, I guess, relaxing after their hike down to the river bottoms. That's something that, again, fulfills our mission of trying to connect youth to the outdoors, and in this case, connect some suburban youth with what it might be like to grow up in rural Minnesota. About every 6 weeks, we have a program at the chapter house, and we send, if there's anybody here from the post office has this fabulous program called Every Door Direct Mail, where you figure out how many mailboxes there are on a route, and you take them that many pieces, and they drop one every place, and they charge you about a third of a stamp to do it. Our route in southwestern Bloomington has 526 mailboxes. So every time we have a program, we send a notice to everybody in our part of Bloomington. But some of the programs that we've had recently, one of our board members is a young man who is in the process of canoeing every mile of every one of the 34 Minnesota state water trails. I will give you an example of one of the Minnesota state water trails. It's the entire Mississippi River from its source to the Iowa border. It's the entire well, not the entire Minnesota River, from Marshall to Fort Snelling. And he's about halfway through. He's canoed about 16 of them, and he put on a program about a month ago, and we had 50 people there, the largest program we've ever had. I made some fabulous homemade, so no, I shouldn't say that. But, and I thought, I wonder if people will be engaged. I mean, we pretty much had to say, time up, enough. People had so many questions, but it was fascinating. We had staff from the International Wolf Center to come and talk about their programs. We've had a program on pollinator protection. Every year, just about every year, we have a program on environmental issues at the Minnesota legislature. And we had a program where we had the DNR come out and talk about the Minnesota Valley State Trail that someday will be built along the Minnesota River from Fort Snelling, theoretically, all the way to Ortonville. So, like I say, we have these programs. Everyone's invited. We try and get it in the Bloomington Sun. We do that local mailing, and we hope that if you hear about it, you'll come. And I guess that's the end. Before I'm done, though, I want to do something here. We'd enjoy it a great deal if every one of you would join our chapter. And is anybody tired of those plastic bags? We have gifts. Everybody gets a reusable shopping bag. Now, this is not totally magnanimous on my part. In every one of these, could you just kind of pass them? There's a piece of paper. And that piece of paper, miraculously, when unfolded, turns into a membership application form for our chapter. It is magic. So I would hope that some of you would decide to join our chapter. Again, I want to thank you for inviting me to speak. After the people that you had from your chapter speaking, I was sitting there thinking, you don't need a program. The gentleman that talked about why he belonged to the Rotary, I mean, that would be a good program a lot of places. But thank you very much. Come join our chapter.